When I turned 50, I opened up about not having children. And frankly, I think I was probably opening up to myself because my journey was one I really couldn't put a finger on, quite frankly. Was I considered childless or was I child-free? And yes, there is a difference. And the key word is choice. And even though I may have chosen at that time not to have children, it doesn't mean I never wanted them. And if I did, that's okay too. Certainly, if the circumstances were different, maybe it would have been a different outcome, right? Well, after I released that episode, which was 121, I saw that the floodgates opened. It got me thinking about how others have a story, and I decided to pass the microphone on to you. And that was episode 124, Voices of the Childless and the Child-Free. It was raw, to say the least. And that was just a few voices. I wish I could have held space for every single one of you that has that story to share it in that one episode. But that just tells me there's more people that have stories to share. And there are people like Lana Manikowski, who has her own story, but is also holding space for those of you who have a story similar, whether it is childless, whether it is child-free, or whatever your journey might be in motherhood. She's the author of So Now What? Create a life you love without children that you always dreamed of. She also has a podcast called So Now What? And you and I met, Lana, when we were attending, actually, you were a speaker at a webinar about writing your book, because that is one of the ways we can share our journey. And I was so taken by your story that it was within, I think the next day, I reached out to you and I said, do you do podcasts? Because I really would love to have you on the show. And here you are. So thank you for saying yes.
Oh, well, thank you for resonating and wanting to share this message with more people because I think you hit the nail on the head. There's like a floodgate that opens when you find out that it's okay to talk about something that seems really taboo to many people.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that this is a taboo topic or that people still see it as a taboo topic, because motherhood can mean so many different things. Like in this moment right now, as you're nurturing your little baby Coco on your lap who just had surgery, these moments should be okay too. As a fur baby parent, right, a pet parent, that we can take these moments and be okay with, we need to nurture that being in that moment that needs us. Also the being that's ourselves. In your story, you share so beautifully about your journey, not having children, the guilt that you went through, the upset you went through, the loss, the grief, all of the phases and stages that we can go through when something that we want so badly doesn't manifest. And you also share with others, just in your own practice. What led you to take your journey to the book, and share more about that?
Yeah, well, I went through a 7-year journey through fertility treatments trying to achieve my goal of motherhood. I got a diagnosis at 37 of something called unexplained infertility. Yes, that is a clinical diagnosis. And when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to have a child when I was ready, I went into panic mode. And that's when my 7-year journey started through fertility treatments. And when I ended that journey without a baby and never having a positive pregnancy test in any of my years of trying, I was offered more resources to achieve motherhood via adoption, via egg donor. And, for me, surrogacy was not an option, but for some people, that's part of the conversation. And there was never once a conversation about, if you decide to remain childless, we have support for you too. And it had me as the person who didn't feel like adoption was the right answer for me. And it didn't feel like a egg donor was something that I was called to pursue. I thought, well, gosh, there must not be a lot of people who leave this journey without a baby, because if there was, there would be more resources. And it wasn't instantaneous that I was ready to start creating the work and the conversation that I have been creating for these last 5 years. But it was out of the lack of resources that really drove me to decide to create something so more women don't have to suffer without resources that help them feel meaningful and purposeful, even though life turned out so differently than they thought.
And with that, we're all on our own journeys here, and sometimes the miracle of life does happen. People go through numerous IVFs, and it might be the last one that takes, or they do decide to adopt, and it's the most beautiful experience ever. But I think the one thing that really hit me hard, and it was probably the conversation we had prior to this, there's no right or wrong way. It's your way. It's what works for you. And I think that's where I'd like to see the conversations change, wouldn't you say?
I wholeheartedly agree because I think a lot of women pursue parenthood, motherhood, because you think that's what you're supposed to do as a woman. And
Mm.
there's this piece of you that feels like society just doesn't resonate with or feel comfortable with or know what to do with because you haven't pursued that route, whether by choice or not by choice.
You offer a beautiful event, and that's when you release the book. I remember you telling me about that, the Others Day brunch that you've been hosting now for a while. Day before Mother's Day, you host this beautiful Others Day brunch. Brilliant. Love the wordplay. When you had your first one, what was it like for you to be in presence of other people that were trusting you in that moment?
Yeah, well, it was just this relief. I think that I needed and other people needed to know that they could celebrate themselves and recognize themselves as something worth celebrating on a weekend that traditionally might feel really hard. And what I love about it too, it was like people weren't showing up and wanting to talk about why they were there. It was just this acceptance of, hey, we're here for whatever reason, and we don't need to do introduction questions about how many kids you have, or are you married, or, what do you do for work? I mean, it's just like those mundane, annoying questions when you like meet someone for the first time. It was just like this room of energy where people just felt like they were excited to meet a new crew of people. Then they didn't have to worry about tiptoeing around questions
Hmm.
that might not sit well.
And speaking of questions, this is something that I love that you share, that you actually have a free resource guide on the 27 things people say when you are childless and how to respond. And so many of those are so recognizable that people will say, and they don't do it with intent to hurt you or harm you. It really is just, it became so normal to say some of these things to people. Going back to what you were saying about this is the next step. You get married, you have a baby, boom, boom, boom. So, can you talk about those things that people say and maybe even offer some suggestions and ideas that could be just a little shift on what you can say and what maybe we should stray away from when someone might be going through um, that journey? And maybe you don't even know they're going through the journey. So it's making it very normal to not even go there, even not knowing what their journey is.
Yeah, well, I created this resource because there were so many clients that were coming to me, or other women who were kind of navigating a childless path, who were like, gosh, it just seems like the world assumes that I come with the accessory of a child. And conversations just seem to never really get deep
Yeah.
beyond how many kids do you have, or are you having kids yet, or what are you waiting for? Those are some of the things that I talk about in the resource. But it's this idea that people are always trying to offer you suggestions, maybe like, oh, they tell you a miracle story about the person who went through 7 years of IVF, and then after stop trying, they just miraculously got pregnant. Or they give you ideas of, pray harder or relax, it'll happen. Or sometimes even things that I don't think they really realize are so jolting, but like things like, oh, you'll never know love until you have a baby,
Oof.
or you might regret it. Who's going to take care of you when you get older? So all these things that we as childless people are forced to not look at ourselves and say, gosh, I must look really flawed as a human, that somebody has all these things to tell me, or suggestions to give me, or their opinions to give me, and they must not see me for me. And maybe they don't know my path and my route, and it doesn't even occur to them that maybe I tried doing all of those things, or maybe I wasn't able to do those things. So for me, it's an opportunity for people to consider, maybe there's no suggestion needed. Maybe we just need to say, oh, okay, period.
Yeah.
And accept someone for who they are. But also, I think women fumble around how to respond to those questions because we worry as loving humans that we're going to offend somebody by telling them our story, or that we might make them feel bad for asking us a question, that it's better to internalize it and judge ourselves than to have that person asking the question feel uncomfortable. And so I think it's also an opportunity as women to live into our truths and come up with ideas of like, how do I want to show up as a person who's representing me and who I am when somebody asks me a question or gives me suggestions of things I should continue to try, as though I don't know my body and my story well enough that I haven't thought about those things.
And sometimes these questions or these statements could be things we're asking ourselves. And maybe it's okay to have those conversations with self, but maybe somebody else isn't ready for that. And I think that's the thing, is like not always assuming somebody is at the stage you might be at, whether it's acceptance or it's process. Well, we're always processing and healing and growing, but don't always assume that somebody is at the stage you're at in the healing process with not having children or choosing to, that a question you might be comfortable with, somebody else might not be comfortable with, you know?
Yeah, and I have, in the part of the resource, I have varied levels of response,
Mhm.
knowing that, maybe there's someone that you want to go deeper with and share more about your journey. And maybe it's just a networking event that you're never going to see someone again, and giving people a variety of answers that they might want to try on and help them construct something of their own that feels genuine and feels connective to you. And when you're ready for it, maybe you can grow on to the next thing. But I totally I understand what you're saying, that there's a level that I'm at where the Lana 5 years ago, I couldn't have been as open and forthcoming with the things that I'd been through because I wasn't sure that I made the right decision. I was questioning myself and questioning who I was, so that the things that I would respond with just weren't at the level that I'm comfortable and truly genuinely responding from as a person at this point in my journey.
Well, this is going to be something we share, the top 27 things people say when you are childless and how to respond. We'll put that in the notes of the podcast episode so you can access it. Share it with somebody else too. It might be very helpful for somebody else to have this content and this information, and you might be providing them with something that's very helpful to them that they've been searching for. So we'll definitely put that in there. You know, something you said in regards to the questions we ask, the things we say, that I'm starting to think about now, especially that I'm in that what they would consider, if I had children, the sandwich generation, right? Where you might have children and you also have elderly parents. And the one in between is basically those of us who are in this age range of about, 40 to 60, pretty much. And not having children and not having someone to care for traditionally, uh, it does have me start, it has started me thinking about, yeah, what you said before. Who's going to take care of me? I don't have anyone. Like I make sure my mom's okay. I want to make sure the older generation that I love is okay. But who's got it for me? You know? So do those kind of conversations come up?
They do. And it's real.
Yeah.
I mean, the unknowns of growing older, whether you have kids who live down the street or across the globe, there's questions when you don't have kids of, am I going to be this person that you hear about in a nursing home who someone stole all her money? There's like like my brain would take me to these places
Totally.
where I would like find myself panicking, and I just have to constantly reel myself back in. You don't know. You don't know. You're doing the best you can right now. And I remind myself of that all the time. I don't know if that's going to be my story. And am I going to give away days of my life where I can be connected to myself and not fret about my future in fear of what may or may not happen?
Right. Pulling yourself out of the now, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really has taken a lot of redirecting and come on, let's come back to where
Mhm.
we are right now. You're healthy, you're safe. We're planning, financially, we're putting resources together if you get to that point. But there's just, there's so many unknowns. And you hear people talk all the time, well, I know someone who's got 5 kids and they never show up and take care of it. And you hear that
Right.
too. So it's like, how much of this am I going to blame on myself
Mm.
that I made a wrong decision or I started too late in life looking for the right partner, or
Mhm.
I waited too long to find the right person to then decide I was ready to pursue parenthood? And it just goes back to that forgiveness of, I'm going to be here for you.
Mm.
And no matter what decisions you made that didn't feel like the right decisions then, I'm going to be with you now and
Mm.
just love you and protect you.
Beautiful. Such a beautiful way to put it, and really a reminder that it really all comes back to safety. We just want to be safe. We want to be loved. We want to know we're
Mhm.
okay. And the thoughts do come up. I have those same thoughts. And then I think, wait a minute, I am robbing the now, thinking about a tomorrow that might never happen. And you're right. People can have 5, 10 kids and none of them show up. So there's so many questions that we ask because we are being pulled out of the traditional conversations that have happened for generations and generations about what is seen as the norm. And so I'm glad that we're kind of shaking it up a little bit. You mentioned in the book, and I love this, that you have these pillars, these 3 pillars that really bring it back to self. Can we talk about those 3 pillars?
Yes. So I was really wanting to figure out, like, if I were to find the main areas where women are struggling when they desired motherhood and it didn't happen, uh, I came to a realization that most people are struggling with body image, and not in your traditional sense
Hmm.
of like, do I look great in a bikini, but forgiving your body for not doing or showing up the way that you thought it was going to. So it could be, whether someone has endometriosis,
Mm.
PCOS, an autoimmune condition. For me, unexplained infertility, not really having a pointed cause for why I couldn't have a baby. So learning how to forgive your body and loving it for showing up in the way it does now and doing the things that it does for you every single day without prompting it to do those things. The other thing is relationships. A lot of people struggle with friends who have kids and their life seems to be in a different trajectory, and it was kind of like your bestie or your core group of friends, and when you go out and they all have mom centric things to talk about and you feel like this outsider amongst people that were your core group.
Hmm.
Maybe if you're in a coupled relationship and you always thought parenthood was going to be part of your future, like,
Hmm.
how do you look at your partner and say, how can we love each other and be enough for each other without children?
Mm.
Because you thought children were going to be that anchoring point. Maybe it's family. You're seeing siblings, you're seeing cousins. Like for me, my little cousin who I used to babysit just had her first child.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, like I see myself as behind the 8 ball from this person that I used to babysit. So the relationships is the second pillar. And then the third pillar is owning your time. And where that comes from is a lot of parents have these previously set milestones in their life because they're raising a child. They know that they're going to be sending a kid off to school when it's, say, 4 or 5. They know the kid's going to go to prom, graduate, potentially get married. There's these like things that you can kind of track your life along when you're a parent, or maybe mentally when you're thinking, who knows what could happen when you raise your child. We don't know that those are the milestones that will happen. But in your brain, you kind of have this cadence of, okay, well, we'll be empty nesters and then we're going to downsize and we're going to do this. So it's understanding, how can you feel connected to this white, I see it, this like huge white blank canvas that has nothing on it and no roadmap for you, but how can you find connection to the things that you want to do, things that you feel proud of doing. When you show up to work on Monday and everyone's talking about volleyball practice and, rushing here with the kids and have to leave to go do this with the kids. And they're like, what did you do? And you're like, oh, I actually, we got in the car and we just went on an impromptu driving trip and went for brunch and had a great dinner and, went to a yoga class. And I would find myself, and a lot of the clients I work with tell me that they find themselves feeling really embarrassed about sharing about their lives because they feel like it just doesn't seem as important as raising a human. So how do you find these things that light you up, things that you're proud of, maybe things that you're exploring in your life that you never even knew were an interest, but you allow yourself to go create those milestones and those interest points in your life and start to really own your time?
I'm sitting here thinking about this, and as we're recording this, all the kids are going back to school right now, right? Kids are going off to college for the first time of some of my friends. Kids are going back to school. I even have some kids that are of friends of mine that are getting married, and I'm like, wow, that could have been me, right? I could be at that point. But I also realize that one thing that comes up a lot is that people will say being a parent's not all that's cracked up to be, and they're like, I envy you for the freedom you have, for the ability to like get up and go, to do what you want to do and not have to be taking care of a child. So, it's always like that grass is always greener. But for someone who doesn't have children and maybe has been through a journey like you have, where you really tried, where are you able to look at this journey that you're on and see that there's a blessing of not being a parent? What's the blessing in not being a parent?
Well, I think that's unique
Mhm.
to each of us. And for me, the blessing of not being a parent was getting to know who I am and not having, not that a child, let's call it accessories, because there was a time in my journey you'll read about in the book where I would go on shopping sprees. And for me, it was like, oh, to be able to go buy a Chanel bag on a Tuesday afternoon felt really liberating to me. And I realize now that was a whole different, it was a buffer for feeling the emotions that I was feeling. But it was the ability to not need anything, not have a house that was 5,000 square feet and feeling like, oh, I have this and I have that and I have a child who does this, but really getting to know who is Lana. How does she show up when she's proud? How does she react? Does she pull herself back because we were taught, oh, don't be boastful, don't let people know that you're proud of who you are? Or do you lean forward and tell your story of triumph in
Mm.
a desire to pull other people forward with you? And I notice like that is something I'm continuously working on, being proud of myself and telling other people that I'm proud of myself. Do I find myself showing up and being a leader in places where I used to quiet myself because I was really embarrassed to say that I couldn't have children and I chose not to adopt, and being able to advocate and say, this is why these weren't the right answers for me. So I don't think I could have had the time and the desire to really peel back to know who I am as a person if I was raising a child.
Mm.
And again, do I know that? I don't know. Like maybe I would have gotten curious, but when I realized that I didn't want to live my life feeling like I was always at 80%, because that was like in my brain, I just kind of thought like, oh, I was just going to have this okay life. It was going to be good, like we had good jobs and we had good money. We, lived in a big city. Yeah, yeah. But I didn't want to be an 80% person. I just didn't want my life to be B minus. And that's when I realized I could figure out who I was and how to light my own fire instead of always looking to bring other things in to create that fire for me.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a woman who's done some self healing and growth. And, you're not alone on this journey. There might be some who don't have children who aren't even married or in partnership and are wondering how are they going to find that support. I want to talk about that in a second too. But I do want to mention if you need a reminder, the book is So Now What? and create a life you love without the children you always dreamed of. I'm going to put a link to this book in the podcast notes. You can always find it on the Holistically Speaking Book Nook, which is the entire library of amazing guests like Lana, who are authors, so that you can just go right to it, grab it, and then even listen to the podcast. It's right there for you if you ever want to refer back. You also have a podcast as well. You have the So Now What podcast, which is created to ensure women who are childless after infertility feel supported, understood, and also empowered. And I love my fellow women podcasters more than anything in the world. I feel like we are a very special bunch because our voices need to be amplified. So I'm so glad that there is a podcast designated to this. And I'm sure there are others, but knowing you, I'm glad you're at the mic. What is it that makes your podcast different?
I love that my podcast is really touching on things that are realistic, things that come up in your life. Like I just got done recording today. My podcast is about legacy and something that a lot of women think that you don't have if you don't have kids.
Mm.
Like they think that your legacy is passed down through your children. And it prompted me. My grandfather would have been 118 yesterday. And he died when I was 6, and I know him through stories that other people told me about him, and from the stories I've heard, he was an exceptional person. And just to give you like a view of like the type of stuff I talk about in the podcast, I talked about the fact that I bet you he wasn't doing all the things he was doing hoping that 118 years later someone would remember him and tell his story. I bet you that he was loving what he was doing while he was doing it and feeling fulfilled by the person he was showing up being. So it's things like that. My podcast is just kind of spur of the moment as far as like these ideas come to me and I'm like, okay, we need to do an episode on that.
Press
or if
record.
I'm working with a client.
Right.
Yeah. And it's not fancy. And, we talked about this before we started. It's just me. I do like 10 or 15-minute episodes, just quick, like blurps you can get on there, and while you're driving to work or on a walk, just pop in, and there's likely going to be something that's going to resonate with you because it's all stuff that we talk about and we are thinking when we are childless, not by choice. And a lot of times I have people listen to my podcast that are friends, and they'll be like, man, I got to tell you, I listen to your podcast every week and I totally relate to it, and I have kids. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll take that as a compliment as well, because I think there's a lot of things that we are searching for pretty much the same things, finding meaningful connections in our life, feeling purposeful, feeling worthy, and like feeling like you're enough as the woman that you are without constantly having to promote, something else in your life as being the thing that makes you worthy and whole.
Yeah, I'm excited that you have this podcast because even though I haven't been on an IVF journey, I'm still a woman who has not had children. And all the things that we're talking about today, Alana, I'm thinking, wow, I thought that. Oh, I've thought that. And just what you're mentioning about legacy, I'm like, there have been times where I've even had that conversation with my wonderful devoted partner, who, by the way, also doesn't have children. So we're two people that have no children, and he's even an only child of two only child parents. So like the question comes up and the conversations come up a lot about this is the end of the line, like last of the Mohegans kind of thing. There's nobody else carrying on the name. And it can be very, very heavy in the moment. But then you have those conversations like, I can't worry about tomorrow, right? And the legacies I create don't have to necessarily be with the direct product of me or you. And it's a lot to unpack, but I think when we just give grace to ourselves, like we're doing the best we can with the tools we have and what we've been given in this life, it can make a big difference. I do want to ask you something. By the way, I will add the podcast to the notes as well. So if anyone's looking for other podcasts to listen to, So Now What will be listed there as well. Here's a question for you, since we talked a little bit about marriage, partnership. How is this related, or relatable rather, to men or those who identify as men?
I can't say that I have a husband who talks a lot about our journey. He and I are very different as far as processing the outwardly like talking about things. He would like never ever imagine coming on my podcast or like talking about his story. However, when there's like Father's Day that comes up, there's a lot of things, and I have chapters in my book about how to navigate Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas holidays, all these different holidays. I was really diligent these last couple years about talking to him about Father's Day and like recognizing that he might be grieving too, because I didn't do a really good job when I was going through fertility treatments, checking on him and realizing that there was this mourning that he was probably going through. I just thought, it's my body, it's my fault. I'm doing the medications and the injections and all these things. And I never stopped to consider that there was a huge grief that he was probably going through. So I can't speak from the guise of my husband's story and the things that he's told me, because he just doesn't really like to talk about it. But there are people who have followed my podcast who say, my husband and my partner, we listen to it together, and it's allowed us to open greater conversations because I'm kind of their medium, if you will, and they're like, oh, they listen to it, and then they're allowed to bring up things maybe that they wouldn't traditionally have found comfortable to bring up unprompted. So I love that my podcast offers that, but I'd love more male listeners. And I'd also love a male who's gone through it, or someone who identifies as a male, to start a podcast for men.
Great idea.
I think everyone assumes that the men are just like okay with it. And I'm guessing that's wrong.
That is a thought. And I wonder if there is one. I've never actually researched that, but it did come to mind for me when I first released that podcast, or when I first released the episode about myself, 121. It was just my journey because I was turning the big 50. But then when I put the signal out there, hey, share your stories, I'll put them on the podcast, I actually had men share. And it made me think, like, you're right. This is not just about me. It's me. Yes, it's my body. It would be the one that would carry the baby. But there's a grief and a loss that the partners feel as well. Whether they are men, identify as men, women identify as women, whatever, the partner feels it too. So it's that could be part of one of those questions we ask, having better conversation.
I carried a lot of guilt, to be honest. It's been a long process of me forgiving myself for not being more observant and cognizant of that, as somebody who had a lot of support from my husband going through this.
Beautiful. Love everything you're sharing. There's so much to this book that we can really get into, but what I advise our friends here that are tuning in is just get the book. I'm going to share it with you. So now what? Create the life you love without the children you always dreamed of. And I love this cover, by the way. It's really beautiful. And I can tell that there's like a deeper meaning to this cover, isn't there? For those who are watching on YouTube, it does look like a woman that could be with child.
I see it. I see that little section there as like a barren section. And so that was kind of, but I have had people tell me it looks like someone with child. If you flip it upside down, it's a question mark.
Oh my gosh.
And then there's also a path, a golden path leading to the sun. If you tap,
I love that.
So there's actually 5 things on my website. If you go to LANA'S.com/book, I do a little video explaining the cover, because the cover was really important to me. And you and I have talked about that. I felt like for so long, my life felt like a sympathy card. Like whenever I told people I couldn't have kids, their first thing would like crouch down, hand on the chest, I'm so sorry. And there would be this like whisper. And I didn't want women to feel like they were always the source of needing sympathy. And so when I wrote this book and I was thinking about my cover design, I was very distinct. I was like, I do not want watercolors and I don't want pastels. Like, I want this to not look like a sympathy card. I want it to be something that pulls you forward and feels like very powerful and joyful. And so you can see by the colors
Mm.
on the cover, like, it was a very bold cover, and that was very much intentional when I thought about the audience that's reading my book, because my message, I tend in my coaching practice to gravitate, or women tend to gravitate towards me, that are seekers, women that are used
Mm.
to finding connection and success in their life. And that's not for everyone. And that's okay. Like, not everyone is intended to move forward with the same power that I feel like I was seeking. But I tend to gravitate and have women gravitate towards me that are those success driven women, who really felt like not being able to have a child prevented them from feeling like they could be successful in other parts of their life, because that was like the ultimate as a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. I can hear so much of what you're saying. I feel like you're
Mm.
talking to me. So I appreciate that. I really do. I think that's why I connected with you in the first place. I could just feel that synergy, even though the journey was different. I never went through the IVF treatment, but I know there's people out there that watch and listen to this episode that have, or have thought about it, or are thinking about it, or frozen their eggs, or maybe they don't want children. Maybe they did and they had something happen in their childhood or in their past that is not allowing them to move forward to have children. There's so many different variables, and none of them are wrong. They're your journeys.
Yeah, I think if I could just add in one thing, I think it's hard because we've grown up in a society that tells us that that's what you're supposed to do. And it's like this unspoken rule that it's
Mhm.
your duty to procreate. And you feel like you're constantly letting people down. And I talk about that actually in episode 1 of my podcast, how my in-laws never had grandchildren. My brother-in-law and his partner never
Mm.
decided to have children. They're in a same-sex marriage, and they decided not to adopt or pursue parenthood that pathway. My husband's sister and her husband didn't want kids. And so I felt like it was up to me to be like the savior and be like the one that brings the grandchildren. And in episode 1, I talked about how I felt like I let down my in-laws, and God bless my father-in-law listens to my podcast like every week. I'm 181 episodes in, and he will always text me, and I'll never forget
Amazing.
that first episode. He texted me and he said, "We were never disappointed." And I just like, I love that, because I'm like, how great that I carried around that expectation of myself for so long that nobody told me I needed to. They never whispered in my ear, like, oh, you know, hopefully you'll be our golden ticket to grandparenthood. But it was just this thing that society told me was like my duty to create a child to make other people feel complete. They're
Beautiful.
awesome.
I
Yeah, we lost my mother-in-law, so sadly hasn't been around to see the book, but my
yeah,
father-in-law is always my number one champ.
I bet she sees the book. Yeah,
Yeah,
right. It's
I
always
think
about
so.
us wanting to see the reaction, but I have a feeling that you're getting the claps from wherever, you know. The
Yeah,
other thought I
thank you.
had about that is that you just touched on feeling the obligation, and I remember feeling something similar, but my thing was the idea that I had heard before, and this is such an awful thing, and this might go back to what the 27 things people say, that somebody said to me that I wasn't a full woman, new womanhood until I actually had a baby. And man, that was like in the gut, you know? I I'm a full woman. I'm 100% woman, and I'm proud of that. But when I heard that, it gutted me, you know? And so we hear these things sometimes, and it almost makes us second guess, and this goes back to the societal way. So in my thought with just thinking about that, my question to you is, what is your hope and goal that either the book or the coaching you do or the programs you have or the Other's Day brunch? Like, what is your goal for, and the podcast, what is your goal going forward?
I think for my number one goal when I got into coaching and doing this type of work is to allow you to define what whole is for you.
Mm,
And I think we oftentimes take passed down stories, we take passed down legacies, whatever ideas that people have been passing down generationally. But we have the liberty as people to believe whatever we want about ourselves, about our stories, about what womanhood is. And whether you want to share that with someone else or not, you can believe it for yourself. And to me, that was the part of the story no one ever told me, that I could choose for myself. And there could be noise around me, and there could be judgments and people not necessarily agreeing with me. And that's okay. They don't have the same lens. They don't know the same things or have lived the same things as me. But the liberty to be able to choose for myself what it means to be a whole woman, like that just to me is what people don't have enough of as far as the messaging goes, because there's so much chatter around you and there's always this trust you put in someone else before yourself.
Yeah.
And that self-trust aspect to know that you know what was right for you and you know how hard you tried or how badly you wanted something and the ends of the earth that you went through, and to be able to create that like soundtrack in your brain about what you want to believe about you and how you see yourself is something that no one can ever take from you.
Beautiful. That's almost the best way to just close this, but I still have a little more for you. We're going to come back to some closing thoughts.
We got more where that's
Oh, I
coming
know
from.
you do. I know, but I'm sitting here and I'm like, she's talking to me, which I love because I know the people who tune into this show are going to resonate with it, with whatever their story is. But I'm sitting here, I'm like, wow, I wish I knew about LANA'S Other's Day brunches and your podcast and even the book when I needed it most. But the beauty is I have it now. And all of you listening and tuning in, wherever you're tuning in, you have it now. If you know somebody that could benefit from this conversation or the book, they'll have it now because you're going to pay it forward and pass it on. And I encourage you to do so because it puts it into more people's hands. But let's have a little fun, shall we? I want to have a little fun with you.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I do a game called the Brain Candy Game. And this is basically a word association game. For the last 45 minutes or so, I have been collecting words that LANA has been saying. And I'm going to throw one out to you. Come back with the first word that comes to mind.
Okay. My perfectionist brain needs to get turned off. Okay.
Right. Just anything you say is
All
okay
right.
to say. Right? Even if it gives me an explicit rating, that's okay. All right, here we go. Pregnancy.
Sadness.
Relatives.
Champions.
Adoption.
Misunderstood.
Time.
Abundant.
Image.
Gorgeous.
Whole.
Me.
Yeah, girl. Relationships.
Complex.
Infertility.
Sadness.
Grief.
Evolving.
Others.
Unique.
Legacy.
Yours.
Connection.
Gorgeous.
And this is 3 words. So now what?
Anything.
Yes. I actually was going to ask you how you came up with the title of the book and your podcast, but if it's anything and everything that follows, is there a reason why? By the way, that was great. You did a good job. Way to hold back on the perfectionism.
I know I used a couple words twice.
Why so now what?
I used so now what because I felt like so many parts of my journey I wanted the answers and I wanted someone to tell me like what was next or what was the right next decision or when enough was enough. And I didn't have it. And so that's why I created it and why I started my podcast in 2021 with So Now What? Because I think we're constantly questioning like what's next. And again, back to the fact that like it's okay for you to know what your next best step is and not wait for somebody else to give it to you.
Beautiful. I was going to say, do you have some closing thoughts? But that sounds really like a beautiful way to close this. However, I want to give you a moment if there's anything else you want to share.
Well, I love the fact that we're having these conversations, and it's taken a lot for me to be able to speak so freely and openly about it, and the ability to have a story that turned out so differently than you thought, whether it's being a mom, whether it's gender identity, whatever the case might be, the fact that you can go back and feel proud of who you are, even when the story didn't end like you thought or start like you thought, to me is the message that we just need to keep sharing and doing that through our own stories. So as you think about, your podcast or people that, want to open up to other people about things that are going on in their life, like know that we want to hear those stories and we want more people listening who want to share their stories to keep telling them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. This has been such a beautiful conversation. Folks, you're going to get all this information. You're going to know how to find Lana. So Now What, the podcast. So Now What, the book. Also, I'll add in there the free resource guide, which is the 27 things people say when you are childless and how to respond. This is very useful information. And just connect with her. You were such a joy to be around. I loved listening to you at that webinar, and I imagine you have a lot more coming up and going on as you're taking this book around the block. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I love the conversation. Thank you so much.
So now what? Well, how about you connect with Lana Manikowski, check out her podcast, grab a copy of that book, So Now What? Create a Life You Love Without the Children You Always Dreamed Of, and you'll find all of these links, including her free resource we talked about in the notes of this podcast. It's all there for you. And the book will obviously be in the HIListically Speaking Book Nook library, so it's always there and available for you to go back to, even reference with this podcast episode. And if you've made it this far, which you have, it's clear that this conversation has resonated with you. So thank you for just sticking it out, staying with us, even during those tough times, and maybe part of the conversation could have hit you in some areas that were a little difficult to listen to, but you're here, and I appreciate that. So consider subscribing to the show if you haven't already. Download this episode so you can always refer back to it. Better yet, pay it forward. You'd be surprised what can happen when you share this with just one person who may need to hear this right now. That's you doing a service to others. And who knows, it might build bigger community. Of course, you can always reach out to me on my social media. Better yet, join me for one of my Havening happy hours with me live. They are free, they are online. It's a supportive community where you'll get to experience a guided Havening session with me, which truly is the future of holistic emotional well-being and compassionate care. It's one more way you can hug it out with yourself. And that brings me back to that question. So now what? Well, my friend, I think that's up to you. But whatever you do, know that it is your journey, you're not alone, and you choose to choose. Music for this episode is provided by my talented friend, Lipbone Redding, with love and support by you. So thank you time and time again. And know that wherever you are at this moment on your journey, I love you. I believe in you. And I'm sending hugs your way. Be well.